Hello, 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 everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another conversation with the ePluribusAmerica and some fabulous guests. We have Wuhan Dansby with us. He is the owner of DRE Partners. You know, it's a lobbying firm here in Washington, D.C. And he's also the chairman of the board of directors of NCBA Housing Management Corporation, which is really an organization that helps senior citizens with housing. And I'm sure you do a lot of other things too. And then we have the beautiful Maya Valentine, a congressional staffer who works also in leadership, and she's also a political insider, in the know, and an influencer, an Instagram influencer. And I think Maya has so much to bring to this conversation. Not just being an influencer, but being a young person who actually has a seat at our historical table in Congress. And so thank you all so very much for joining me here today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
So we're going to start off with, some of the big news that we are hearing, which is Leader Pelosi will no longer be seeking leadership posts. So I'm going to play a video, and I'll get your thoughts on it.
I will not seek re-election to Democratic leadership in the next Congress. For me, the hours come for a new generation to lead the Democratic caucus that I so deeply respect. And I'm grateful that so many are ready and willing to shoulder this awesome responsibility.
So, as you see there, our phenomenal leader. I am going to be biased. I think she is an incredible leader. She's seen us through a lot of tough times, especially the Trump era, and also January 6th. And she's a pretty she's certainly been put through the ringer as far as a leader, and she's a historical figure, the first woman Speaker of the House. So I'll start with you, Maya. What are your thoughts on Leader Pelosi passing along the gavel to those coming next in line? And obviously one of them who just announced is Chairman Jeffries. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so, initially I was recovering from the flu. I had the flu when she was on the House floor. But when I saw her speech, I remembered thinking just how emotional I was about it, but also just how brave she was to make this decision. It's obviously not an easy decision, especially after you've led a party through, like you said, impeachment, but also the pandemic, which was a once in a century sort of phenomenon that hit our country and the world. And I was thinking, wow, what a career she had, especially as a woman who kind of rose the ranks and really guided a caucus through thick and thin. And I think ultimately, I thought it was brave and courageous. And there is something to say about people who know when it's time to pass the torch. And when we're in a moment like this, that, we're still so divided as a country, sometimes people feel like things aren't getting done or they don't see things getting done. But I think this was a symbol of and in a way, for me, it looked like an effort to sort of re-energize a base and re-energize the way that people look at Democratic leadership. And they're aware that it is time to sort of train that next generation. And Hakeem Jeffries is, obviously was such a great chairman, great member of Congress. And I think a lot of people are really excited at the prospect of a Black man leading the Democratic caucus for the first time. So I had a rush of emotions because, Nancy Pelosi is a superhero to me and a lot of women who've looked up to her. especially a lot of young women who are, who've been on the Hill and who've seen her, who've had, the opportunity to take pictures with her. She's been such an influential woman in our country. And I think we're always going to look back at this and think, wow, what a legacy and what a moment. And I think she said something in her speech about how she can't wait to see the story of our nation unfold. No doubt she'll continue playing a role, but I thought it was really sort of, I admired her ability to recognize that there's still so much more to do. And even if it doesn't have the, the name of speaker, she can see that others are ready to take on that sort of job. So I applaud her. I am biased too. I love her. And I can't wait to see what this moment sort of, what sparks from this moment.
Yes, well, she'll certainly maintain her power. She may not hold on to the gavel because she doesn't want it anymore, but she'll certainly maintain her power. Woo-Hen, what are your thoughts on the changing of the guards?
I substantially agree with everything that Maya has outlined. I think what became evident to me as things unfolded after the speech is that this was an opportunity, in my view, that she was waiting for. Now, I don't believe that had the House not changed hands, it would have been as important for her to step down. But since the House did change hands, this was an opportunity to bring on what I believe are her handpicked successors, Hakeem Jeffries, and I believe Mr. Aguilar and Ms. Clark, who clearly were put in those positions through her power and influence. But this gives them an opportunity to create their own agenda with her in a emeritus role, but without the pressures of being in the majority. Because I do believe that with such a thin majority that will be in the Republicans' hands, it's going to be total chaos. And I believe this will give the Democrats a chance to reestablish themselves to regain the House in 24 without having to have everything play out in public, because we'll be watching the Republican circus for the next 2 years. So I think it was an opportune time for her to give up the chair or the leadership role, but also give whoever the new leadership is a chance to transition. And what was also not discussed as much was Representative Clyburn and Hoyer, who also went out graciously. And so we won't see a lot of fighting for those other seats that, Pelosi but was the leader of. So I think this was the wise move to make at this point in time.
I see. So what are your thoughts on what the next couple of years are going to look like? You alluded to that, and you actually think that the Democrats have a better chance of taking over the House in 2024. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? And what do you think? Should playbooks be changed? Should we go at it differently? And should we take advantage of the fact that the Republicans will be enthralled, or they're certainly going to try to bring about a Benghazi-style Hunter Biden investigation? They've already asked for a special prosecutor. So what are your thoughts on how the Democrats can take over the House again strategically?
Yeah, I think if you look at where their weaknesses were actually in their strongest areas, which are the coast, New York, and some areas of California. I think that there were some real short coattails in the governor's race that really did not propel some of those seats to be held by, the Democrats. I think those can be pickups. But I think the real biggest issue will be that I think the Republicans are going to self-destruct. Their agenda isn't based on anything policy related. They ran on crime, which was, similar to, it was their version of the caravan that was coming up in the previous midterm. And then they ran on inflation, but you haven't heard them discuss any of their plans. Those were just things to run on, but we see what their real agenda is just to create this air of illegitimacy or criminality within the Biden administration. And I don't think people are going to buy into that in any large numbers. I think if they really believed that, they would have ran on it, and they didn't run on it. They ran on something else. But when they had a chance to roll out their program, they didn't even mention those issues. So if anyone voted for them for inflation or crime, they're certainly going to be disappointed when they don't discuss it as they move forward with policy prescriptions, as this is, the main component of your job as legislatures. So as a legislature, they can't keep just campaigning. They have to legislate. And so I think people are going to expect some results, and I don't think they're going to see it.
But they have gained supporters. Polls are showing that they gained 70% of Latino votes. They gained another significant number in Black votes, Black men's votes. So it seems like they're certainly engaging and increasing their number of supporters. But Maya, what are your thoughts on GOP plans in the next 2 years and how the Democrats can take over again in 2024?
So I want to start by saying that I know that there was a lot of concern leading up to the midterms on the sort of red wave that everyone thought was coming. And I think it's really telling just how much we were able to hold the House and keep the Senate still with a Democratic president. I mean, I think that there were some, this hadn't happened in years. There were some, like stories coming out about how unprecedented this really is. And I think that's important because, I was on the campaign trail working for a Democratic councilman who was running for congressman. And he was trying to defeat an incumbent of some 20 years. And when we talked for the first time, he was like, my messages are democracy, are on freedom and women's rights, and like things like families, those three sort of very like digestible messages that I think everybody has, or everyone support, like people support freedom, people support democracy that works, people support like supporting families and children, and that's what really helped him win. And I think that for the most part, Democrats have stuck to those kind of really like bread and butter issues that people care about. Like Wuhan was saying, Republicans have no policy agenda. They want to fearmonger, and they talk about crime, and they sort of dog whistle to, minority groups. And when we passed like the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, I mean, we can talk about how those have tangible impacts on families, how those have tangible impacts on communities, how those are speaking to some of the demands that people have wanted to see, especially just generally action in Washington. And I think the next 2 years, you're going to see, like you mentioned, Jeanette, Republicans coming up with these committees to investigate the president and kind of cast doubt on this administration and sort of talk to their base about, just how what they come up with a toxic narrative about this administration. And then Democrats, on the other hand, are going to keep on talking about those messages that they know work with people. They're going to keep going on the campaign trail and talking to people about what their needs are. And I think they're really going to convince people in 2024, just like they were able to do this year, about what's at stake and what their plans are, their actual plans are to fix these things. And, just going off on a little bit of a tangent, what surprised me the most, kind of speaking to what you just mentioned about the inroads that some Republicans have made with minority voters, I remember it was election day, and I was sort of passing out these Democratic sample ballots for my the candidate I was working for, and a couple times Black men had come up to me and were like, "Can you tell me more about like this or that?" And a couple of times we got into a conversation, and they were very pessimistic about the Democratic Party. They were like, they're not doing anything for my community. And I was like, no, they are. And I wasn't trying to sound, judgmental. I wasn't really trying to like persuade. I was just trying to talk to them realistically about the action items that I've seen in my role. But it's true. Like there is a group, I think, for Black communities, it's often Black men, not so much Black women, who are hearing these sort of Republican messages and being drawn to it. And, it's really, in my opinion, it's really not about Democrat or Republican. It's just about what makes more sense for for your community, for you. But it was unfortunate for me to sort of have these sort of back and forths with these individuals. So that was
I find that interesting that you mentioned Black men, because part of the conversation, at least coming from folks like the Stacey Abrams, and also Keisha Lance Bottom, former mayor of Atlanta, but now she's in the White House. And they've all talked about, Black men and misinformation and disinformation. Are you saying that there's some credibility to that, and there's some truth to that? Because there's also the other camp that finds that somewhat, disappointing, because they're saying that it actually insinuate that Black men are not smart enough to wade their way through misinformation or disinformation, and that the blame for the lack of her winning is being placed on Black men. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. You mentioned it.
Information and disinformation is prevalent just about everywhere. It doesn't matter what community you're coming from. And I think it's very persuasive. And it's persuasive, especially for people who have not seen the gains that were promised to them for whatever many years. And that's a real truth. And like that should not be invalidated at all. I think that for whatever reason, like it speaks more to like certain people than it does others. And what I saw on the campaign trail was like, it did seem like a bit of a disparity between like Black men coming up to me and talking to me, and then Black women who were also engaging in the same sort of conversations. I think that it's also telling when, like, you were just mentioning about those sort of exit polls and the demographics that are leaning more Republican. I think it's not about intelligence. It's not about like how it's about feeling like a party is not working for you and not seeing those gains in the way that you expect them to. And so that makes you switch. I don't think it's necessarily about the type of information you're consuming all the time. I think it's what you see and what you don't see. And sometimes it's just as simple as that. And it's hard to convince a community that has been left out, that hasn't been given the same equal rights and opportunities as others, that someone is fighting for you. Because I think at that point, like, what are they pointing to, and it's just sometimes hard to convince.
So Wuhan, as a Black man, how would you like the Democratic Party to engage you? And do you feel misinformed or disinformed? Do you think there's any legitimacy to that I don't know if it's an argument or a criticism that Black men aren't voting because they're misinformed and disinformed?
I do think there's some credibility to that. I'm involved with, my fraternity organization, and we have a lot of chat discussions from all perspectives of the, from the farthest of the far right to the farthest of the far left. And there is a lot of misinformation that does travel and is given credence by people who sometimes talk the loudest or wear the most, you know, culture-driven attire. Let's just say that. And some of these memes are picked up by some younger Black men. There's a lot of, and it's been documented, there's a lot of deliberate information that is placed in social media from countries outside of the United States. And these things are very powerful, and they play to what is often under discussed as this undercurrent of misogyny that exists within our culture. We don't discuss it that much because it never reaches the mainstream of the media, but that it is there. And I've seen it in barbershops, I've seen it online, among men who are quote unquote educated. But I think this is a problem that unfortunately needs to be held behind closed doors. But we often don't have that discussion because most of the people who are holding the mic are part of the problem. So yes, that is an issue, and I witnessed it myself. I saw it when Kamala Harris was running for president. It was just almost an avalanche of information that had nothing to do with her campaign, but people were repeating it almost verbatim. And it was proven through a number of credible channels that there was a disinformation campaign to thwart her candidacy for president. And unfortunately, these memes can come out, and if you are not informed with other information that from credible sources, you can easily fall for it. Particularly if you don't follow politics closely, you think this kind of information might have some credibility when in fact it can easily be debunked. But at that point, it's saturated through, and it's very difficult to offset. So I think that the amount of misinformation through all the social media has a negative impact, and it does over time impact the number of people who actually come out to vote, as well as the number of people who feel disaffected to the point where they just stop voting altogether, where no new information is going to persuade them to vote either for a conservative or a liberal candidate, which basically is mission accomplished for those who want to see the Republicans or conservatives back in office. They don't really want your vote because they don't want to have to serve you, but then they don't want you to vote for the Democrat. So they win either way.
Well, we have some comments and some participants. So let's see what Rick Short is in New York. Hi, Rick. Thank you so much for joining. And Rick says, what are your thoughts on the possibilities of the Republican Party fractionating into moderate and extreme philosophies? Surely they know such a move will weaken the power of each resultant group, but they don't seem to want to live with each other either. So what are your thoughts on what Rick Short in New York is asking? Maya?
I don't know. I don't see the Republican Party sort of factioning into a moderate camp and then an extreme camp. I think that they are pursuing an extreme camp entirely. And I think that Liz Cheney, them sort of outing her for her work to, hold accountable everyone involved in the January 6th insurrection was a good sort of evidence of that. And other moderate Republicans too, who were once seen as like those kind of core Republicans, like growing up, I would think of like Bushes and of course the Cheneys. And now I don't. I can't in my head sort of like separate them. For me, it's like I see Republicans turning into this very extreme and out of touch party. And that is true in the types of candidates they are pushing forward. That is true in who wins in some of these districts across the country and what they say when they come to Congress. I just think that more and more they are reflecting a party that unfortunately is more extreme and embraces these sort of outlandish sort of conspiracies and philosophies and that sort of thing. So might sound a little bit pessimistic, but
let's go to another question. Rick is also asking if did Leader Pelosi, the party insists she stepped down, perhaps to craft a fresh face for them to go to market with. As somebody who's actually there, Maya, what are your thoughts on this question? Can you answer this question?
So I do not know what sort of internal conversations were happening. I do think though that it was her decision to make, and she made it. And I believe a lot of decisions went into that. I mean, what happened to her husband was tragic and awful, and I'm sure that played a role. I think also the fact that Democrats are in the minority, like that is an opportunity, like Wuhan was saying, to transition. I think that there were a lot of things that came to her decision, but I do think that ultimately that was her decision to make and hers alone. And I think there were also reports of like her getting calls from other members saying that she should stay and like Biden weighing in. I mean, I think people wanted her to stay personally, but I think ultimately, like she said in her speech and like other leadership indicated, it was time for a new generation, and they took that moment.
Speaking of leaving and coming back, I'd like to move on to Trump 2.0. So if you can indulge me, let's watch the video.
I think Donald Trump's going to be the Republican nominee. And as much as we might hate it, he stands a very good chance of being the next president of the United States. He should be taken very, very seriously. I don't know if anyone can really defeat him in a primary, but they face reality. Say you're Ron DeSantis, you run against Donald Trump, you manage to win. Donald Trump will wake up the next day and do everything he can to make sure you're never president. And that's within his power. This is a very weak party. Its literal platform, the written document, is still to support whatever Donald Trump says that he would like. So there's no courage to fight Trump in the Republican Party. It's a bunch of cowards and weak people, and they'll fall in line behind Donald Trump.
So, you see there that a lot has been said, and, he's one of the founders of the Lincoln Project. So, Wuhan, what are your thoughts on Trump announcing another run for office, but also what Stevens just said about his ability to, that he could actually win. He is a force to be reckoned with. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think we have to consider the fact that the Republican Party is shrinking, and whether he becomes the nominee or not, there just aren't enough people that are going to vote for him in all 50 states to propel him to an electoral college victory. I think that the midterms are evidence of that already, that if we have the strength to come out in the numbers we did in the midterms, just think what's going to happen in the general. I think Trump is going to be fighting so many battles on so many fronts in the legal realm, he won't be able to get through a news cycle in a presidential campaign without also having to address his legal issues, and which will be popping up periodically. And he cannot just go on to Newsmax and other conservative stations and reach the majority of the people. I mean, when Rupert Murdoch, who today says he's turned against Trump, I mean, if he stays, we also have to consider that a lot of people turn away from Trump only to come back 2 weeks later. But if they can stand and keep this anti-Trump stance that they've had throughout all their properties, I don't think he can win the nomination, but I don't think he's going to be able to reach the number of people. He can't create the magic that was created in 2016 at this point. But I do think a lot of people will continue to support him, and I do believe Stuart Stevens is right that the nomination at this point is his to lose.
Maya, what are your thoughts with this? If him making this announcement and him becoming the eventual nominee, would that be a good thing for Democrats? Is that what Democrats are secretly wishing for?
I think like the idea of Trump running and winning the Republican nomination is something to be taken very seriously. I mean, if 2016 proved anything to us, it's that this can happen. And I think what Wuhan is saying is correct. I mean, he will be so he just blasted with the January 6th stuff, with the legal stuff, with all these sort of other like things that keep popping up about him. And I think that it's going to harm him, but I don't think that it's going to be enough for voters to, especially voters who follow him, to count him out. And I think we're gonna see. I think Ron DeSantis is a strong Republican candidate as well, and I think that him even winning 20 points for his in his race proved that he has a little bit of a star power, and he can sort of carry these voters that may not be those Trump voters. But we'll see. I mean, I'm confident that Democrats are going to prevail in 2024 because I think they have the agenda that people need right now. But but only time will tell. I guess we'll have to just keep our eyes on the race.
So is there still room to reach across the aisle? Is there still room for common ground, to build upon common ground? Because supposedly the Republicans have said that some of their policy issues are education, the inflation, border security, crime. I mean, those are all big ticket items for the Democrats as well. So in spite of the fights that we see ahead of us, is there also room for us to come together and build upon the things that we agree upon, that we see eye to eye on?
That's a hard conversation. I think that what I've seen in the last 3 years working on Capitol Hill is that there is still sometimes room. And that's not like, the best sort of answer. But I've seen really great compromises come from pure, negotiation, like talks, like the bipartisan communities, Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That was a bipartisan thing. We pass appropriations packages every year. I mean, and there are some really good bipartisan wins. There have been, from what I've seen. But when it comes down to those really specific, like value-driven policies, there are so many differences that it's really hard to tell. I mean, and also Republicans are more on rhetoric and Democrats are more on action. And I think that those two things never really come together and produce the sort of transformational change that people want to see. I mean, even the American Rescue Plan, right? That was a needed piece of legislation at the moment we were in. It, got shots in arms, money in pockets, that whole thing, and Republicans were opposed. And I mean, it really came down to helping people get out of this sort of pandemic and build their lives back up and just help them stay afloat. And there were some really, sort of harmful things said about like what this legislation was. And after it was passed into law, enacted into law, like Republicans were taking credit for some of those wins. So I think it's tricky. Washington is like very divided too. There are moments where bipartisanship counts and it can produce meaningful results, but I think it's going to be, hard to see that with the Republican majority in the House.
What are your thoughts, Wuhan? Are you at all hopeful that we can find common ground and have some solutions and solve some problems moving forward, at least in the next 2 years?
I don't think in the next 2 years, because consider that the presumptive nominee has already launched their campaign. We can't really expect them to do much in the way of bringing any policy programs, because they're going to be in campaign mode for the next 2 years. They're taking their cues off of Mr. Trump, and so if he's going to be out campaigning and throwing fireballs, they're going to take their cues from him. So I don't see any real opportunities, maybe on the margins where, as Maya was saying, these sort of core, we got to keep the country moving, but anything substantial is not going to happen in this Congress. Just the optics, in their view, of passing something is going to look like capitulation, and you're going you're going squish, or whatever their term is, with the liberals. So I don't think they're going to have any real opportunities, in their view, to move forward. And on the other hand, I'm not sure that there's going to be any value in, and I know, since I'm not the president of the United States, I can say this, I don't see a lot of value in continuing to reach out to these people who don't really want to do anything anyway. But
we can't legislate without them. We can't legislate without them. So that doesn't seem to be an option. It isn't even an option.
I don't think there's a good faith effort in the Republican Party at this time. And Maya mentioned something about the fact that the direction of the Republican Party is going so far to the right. They will have to be defeated soundly. And I've seen many former Republicans say this: the only way for them to change is for them to be continually beaten at the polls in enough election cycles so that the forces of change will be set upon them in a way that they will have no other choice but to change. But I don't think this election cycle proved it to enough of them to make the change. I think 24 is going to have to be a landslide, and then maybe even another midterm where we just, as Democrats, take it to them. And then maybe by 26, you might start to see some change. But until then,
sounds like it's going to be the long game. But speaking of throwing fireballs, the former LA City Council member, Nury Martinez, threw a serious fireball. Let's watch that video and talk about it.
Mike Bonin is an LA City Council member and father to a young black son. Last year, they went to an MLK Day parade. City Council President Nury Martinez had some issues.
It's like black and brown on this floor, and then there's this white guy with this little black kid who's misbehaved. The kid's bouncing off the effing walls on the floor, practically tipping it over. There's nothing you can do to control him.
Translation: little monkey.
They're raising him like a little white kid, which I was like, This kid needs a beat down. Like, let me take him around the corner and then I'll bring him back. It's an accessory. When we do the MLK parade.
Just like when
they used to have those statues in plantations.
Yeah, like when Nori brings the whole yard bag or the Louis Vuitton bag in places.
That last voice, Council Member Kevin De Leon. He's got big ambitions. Ran for mayor this year and the U.S. Senate seat in 18. I regret appearing to condone and even contribute to certain insensitive comments, he wrote. I fell short of the expectations we set for our leaders.
Now, this audio tells us a couple of things. The first is the kind of language that some politicians are happy to use when they think nobody is listening. And also, it tells us about the deep divisions amongst the left of center leaders here in Los Angeles. Now, Nuri Martinez is a child of Mexican immigrants, but she says this about immigrants from the Mexican state of Oaxaca. She calls them short, little, dark people. And she says of the Cuban-American district attorney here in LA, she says, F that guy. He's with the blacks.
So, as you can see, there's a lot to unpack here. A lot to unpack. It was certainly disappointing. But I have to say, one of the things that really stuck out for me in this recording was hearing Ms. Martinez say that the little boy is being treated like a white child and that he needs a beating. That symbolism for me really conjured up some very hurt feelings that I felt like, wow, maybe we haven't built enough of a coalition or a bridge between black and brown people. Maybe there are some who harbor certain ill will and ill feelings amongst each other. Mind you, this is LA City Council. This is the fourth largest economy in the country, right? I mean, this is this is very important. So what are your thoughts, Amaya? Let's start with you. What did you think about that? How do you overcome this? And what are your thoughts on the cultural divide that seems to still be amongst black and brown people?
I think that what the councilwoman said was unfortunate and just totally disappointing, especially to her constituents, who put her into office. And, I think that unfortunately, racism and prejudice continue to exist, no matter sort of where you're looking, it exists. And I think that, for when I first heard this story, I was like, wow, there's just so much work to do. And it is very unfortunate. I think that it's just sort of it's a sign that there's just a lot more ground to cover. And unfortunately, when moments like this happen and they kind of get into the mainstream, there are a lot of emotions about it. And it's saddening that, we want to believe we're somewhere and we're not all the time. So I remember I just thought there's just so much work. There's just so much work to do.
Yeah. Wuhan, what are your thoughts when what did you think when you heard that? Were you surprised? Because sometimes we're not surprised.
I was surprised, but not shocked. Let's be honest. We've heard similar conversations. There's still some resistance for interracial adoption, gay adoption of children of color. I mean, let's not pretend like those aren't conversations that are had, whether they're recorded or not, or whether they're had by people in high office or elsewhere. So that's why I say I was surprised but not shocked. The beating part was very disturbing, and it was really more disturbing when she initially announced she wasn't going to resign. That's what shocked me. It's like, really? So you should
really
have
apologize. She really did apologize either. She said she's sorry about how it went down, or that she wasn't allowed to finish what she started. It's like, ma'am, do you understand? Like,
yeah,
you literally talking about, you called the little black child a monkey. What's wrong with you? And you're considering how you got there, considering your own heritage. There's a serious disconnect, and it reminds me of
child abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and it reminds you of a lot of immigrants that do come to this country. They actually don't want others to. Some of them don't want others to come. You get a lot of that type of sentiments too. Like, hey, if, forget how I got here, or you go stand in line like I did. That type of sentiment. Kind of. Some people tend to forget their lineage, where they come from, and she really highlighted that, especially when she also talked about the Oaxacans, the difference between her people, our people, we're not that much different.
Right. I think what also is saddening about this moment is that I think a lot of the Black community feels like politicians don't always have their best interests, and feels like they're just pandering to get their vote. And moments like this, you really think like, I get why there is such resistance and trust in these sort of people that we elect to do the right thing, to do their job, to look after our best interests. And then like these tapes come out, and it's not the first time we've heard these sort of background, like these conversations happening in the background when multiple people are like talking and being hurtful to people who do not look like them. So I think it also just spoke to this bigger issue that we have and we know exists in a political world, and then how that just sort of amplifies this distrust. It's just unfortunate.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. And speaking of unfortunate, another story and that we are going to move on to is about Shanquilla Robinson. I'm not sure if you all have been reading about it. It's viral. It's all over the place. Let's play a video, and then we'll lead into the conversation of all the arbitrary killings among our young people. So, 1 second.
So many open questions at this point. First of all, what do we know about what happened to Shanquilla Robinson on this trip to Mexico?
We know that she went on a trip with friends and she didn't come home, for starters. There is a video out there, which we have not verified, but her mother said she watched it. She believes it's her daughter. And in the video, she is being beaten up by these alleged friends. She's naked. There's someone filming this incident and saying, at least fight for yourself. This is allegedly the best friend that her mother said she believes was there. It's a horrifying story.
This afternoon, the suspect in the deadly shooting at the University of Virginia is in custody. This is a live look from the grounds at this hour. Now, take a look at your screen. This is the photo we have of the suspect. He is identified as Christopher Darnell Jones. Within the last hour, we've also learned 3 football players are dead and at least 2 other students are hurt after the shooting.
All right, so it's been a week since someone shot and killed a 13-year-old boy out raking leaves in his front yard in Prince George's County, and police still have no idea who did it or why.
The hunt is on for a suspected killer following the horrifying homicides of 4 University of Idaho students at an off-campus apartment.
It's just not something that you can comprehend in that moment.
it's she took the words right out of at least my mouth. It's something that I can comprehend in any moment. Our young people are killing each other. I'm not sure if it's the effects of COVID or what, or if they think that we can simply reboot these human beings. I mean, it seems like there's a real disconnect, and just tragedy after tragedy. But the latest one really got me. Imagine planning a trip with your so-called friends for a good time, and then you go there and then you end up being beaten to death. It's unconscionable to me. Wuhan, what were your thoughts when you found out about this story?
Well, I have a daughter who's not too much younger than those young ladies, and connecting that, and also the UVA, because she's going off to college. But violence, unfortunately, it's something we've just come to normalize, and that's really what's kind of was the wake up for me. It's like we've gotten so used to violence, and we don't really know how violence is perceived, and this level of violence is perceived outside of this country. And not to go too far astray, a couple years ago, I was in Montreal for business for about 14 days. They had one killing there, just one, and it ran on the news every night, breaking it down and dissecting all the things that could have led to this one murder. And that was all they had the whole time I was there. And that I was shocked that I'm like thinking, as an American, why do they keep running this? But for them, this was very disturbing, and they wanted to figure out how to deal with it. We just figure out, how do we get to the next story, and how do we, repackage that? It's an entirely different mindset. So I can't even begin to understand the how and why. I mean, clearly, and I'm not a prosecutor, so I mean, clearly this was thought through when they took this trip down to Mexico, that something was, maybe they didn't plan to kill this young lady, but there was definitely, this didn't seem spontaneous, and I don't know too much more than what's been reported on the news. But it's just bewildering. Not on. It's just bewildering.
Yeah. Maya, you're in somewhat of that world. You're an influencer. You're on Instagram. You have a lot of followers. You're in that travel capture. You're in this moment yourself. And so you take trips with your friends. Did this scare you? What were your thoughts when you saw this?
Yeah, I mean, the first thought I had was those weren't her friends. I mean, clearly. And it did seem somewhat premeditated. I mean, they left her there. They lied to her mother. They didn't come out with a clear story about what happened. I mean, there were just so many red flags. And it's so unfortunate because, and alarming, because this was a young Black woman, 25 years old, who went on a trip with people who she thought were her friends. And it's like that happens every day. And what's even more disheartening is that, I think that we as a country need to seriously look at, like you were saying, the violence that is happening to young people who are losing their lives way too soon, but also those other stories, about those young Black women whose stories never come out in daylight, those stories of young Black trans women, young Black trans men, like this community of people who have these sort of violent endings, and no one's doing anything about them. I mean, it is heartbreaking because this is one story, but it symbolizes so much, and it happens so frequently. Maybe not that it doesn't look like the same headline every single time, but yes, young people are dying, and it's just tragic. And I don't know what I don't know what is sort of triggering these cases. But even what happened at UVA, I mean, I think of, violence impacts us the closer in proximity it is. That's why when like a war happens in a different country, we don't always feel like those human stories behind it. But UVA is right here. Like, it's not that far from any of us. And to see those young people just lose their lives. One was sleeping, and they had just come back from DC. I think they were seeing a play. I mean, it's just heartbreaking because it's right here. And that's what this is. It's violence right here all the time. And these communities and these families that are never the same again after it. And who knows what the real solution is, but I mean, something's got to stop.
A 13-year-old who, how does a 13-year-old get shot raking their yard?
Right.
Wuhan, how does that happen in 2022 when we're supposed to know better?
Well, I mean, we keep talking about background checks and all these things, but what we end up doing is handing out even more guns. And I don't know too much more than what's been reported on the story, but I think a lot of issues just around the number of guns that, what do we have, 4 times as many guns as people in the United States now. And these guns are concentrated into the hands of a relatively small number of people. And so we never really, because we're always going through the fire hose of all these news stories, we never keep persistently going back and getting to the root cause of the fact is that so many people who have guns shouldn't have them in the first place. And then they want to have a grandfather clause. Well, if you already have a gun and you're crazy, well, we don't want to take it away from you because then, there are slippery slope issues. So I think we've got to really go back and start looking at doing background checks, and not just do background checks, but you've got to renew your background check, just like you renew your driver's license. You might not have a mental issue today, but 2 or 3 years from now, maybe event has happened in your life, some sort of tragedy, and you shouldn't be possessing a gun.
That's a really good point.
I think there's a lot of people. I mean, who knows why this person shot this young man? He probably was making $1 or maybe doing some good for someone. I mean, for that to set you off, you clearly should not be in possession of a weapon of any kind.
But what about the racism? Do you think it could have had something to do with the fact that he was just a little black boy? Do you think there's, there could be racism there? I mean, it wasn't that long ago we were watching Ahmaud Arbery, being blatantly, lynched in front of cameras. Do you think there could
that should be called mental illness too?
Yeah,
that should be mental illness too. So
it's all mental.
It's mental illness, and we don't talk about it in that framework, but if you do something that's completely and totally irrational, you're not in good mental health.
Right.
So it's a mental illness.
Maya?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, like, the relationship with violence and racism in this country is very obvious. And, I think that, just kind of going abstract here, this country has a very serious sort of contract with violence. And I don't know, every case and those sort of nuances with cases, but I think as a nation, we have this weird and strange relationship with violence, even on a political level. The rhetoric that we see some of these more extremist politicians espouse, that is violent. That's violence. What happened to Paul Pelosi came from a violent, sort of rhetoric. January 6th, violent rhetoric. And then you have like these incidences that seem sort of like isolated, but where do those really come from? I mean, we're talking about a nation that's never been able to grapple with its own violent past. And now we have this sort of surplus of guns, like you were saying, Wuhan, like a gun epidemic here that we can't seem to control. Young people, worried about going to school. I mean, this is a real serious American problem.
Yeah. Is there a solution? It is an American problem. We glorify guns and violence and debauchery. We almost celebrate those who seek infamy. Whether as a mass shooter or selling your sex tape. We seem to celebrate those people. Is there anything, either one of you, and I'll start with you, Wuhan, anything that you think young people should hear from us? What can we say to convince them to think twice about reacting violently with pulling out a gun and just shooting the next person or the next thing? What can we leave our young people with as far as changing the way that they're handling their disputes?
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the young people have had some very poor examples, because the violence has only persisted. I don't know if it's escalated. I think there's so many different channels to hear about violence, but I think young people will have to talk to other young people, because the generations that have preceded them have failed in this regard. If you look at the gun legislation, the proliferations of guns, I should say, young people didn't put these guns out there. Their elders did. And on a positive note, I think young people will be able to handle this situation and resolve it much quicker than our generation, because I don't think they have grown up with the hold of the NRA. And even though it's been weakened, they aren't listening to them anymore. And so as much as it is sad to see so many young people perpetrating violence against other young people, I think they will be the ones to break the cycle. And instead of us them listening to us, I think we should be listening to them, because their voices are saying, we don't want this, but we're not listening.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, they're killing each other left and right.
I
Maya, any advice that you could impart on young people as an influencer in the digital age? What would you say to a group of young people who are facing these types of issues? Whether it's internal turmoil, external turmoils, whatever it is. What can you give them to hold on to?
I would say that nothing has ever, how should I say this? I like to think of the prolific leaders who have come before us and who have chosen, even in the most violent chapters of American history, nonviolence as a solution and nonviolence as a method of peace. And even though that might be like something that, I kind of lean on, I think it's true. Like, the type of world we want does not come from violence. It comes from like working together, and it comes from like leaning on each other, leaning on us as a people and finding that shared humanity. But I often like look up to people who, and even in the darkest sort of moments, have chosen a more sort of like a more sort of righteous path. And like, I think, for young people, it's easier to fight back than sometimes it is to hold back. But what counts more is the type of decision you make for your own life. And I think sometimes it's that simple, like what's best for you in your own life.
I like what you said there. Instead of fighting back, hold back. I think that's very important. We should make it a hashtag. Maybe they'll see it. But speaking of the world changing, we are finally at our last topic, which is Thanksgiving. You know, I have to admit, Christmas is my favorite time of the year, but you know, Thanksgiving is right after. But only because I love stuffing and turkey, and you know, it's such a good. I just love the coming together with friends and family, and just having a good excuse to eat as much as you want, and pay for it later. So, but the world is changing, and Thanksgiving really highlights that. You know, we are further away from our families. You know, cultures are changing, and technology has made a huge difference. You know, but let's watch this video to put you in a little spirit, and then we'll talk about the spirit of Thanksgiving. Where does it fit into our lives in the new digital age and so forth? So, yeah, let's.
Beans, green potatoes, tomato, lamb, rams, hogs, dogs, chicken, turkeys, rabbits. You name it. Beans, greens, potatoes, tomatoes, lamb, rams, hogs, beans, greens, potatoes, tomatoes. You name it. Lamb, rams, dogs, beans, potatoes, tomatoes, chicken, turkeys, potatoes, tomatoes. Lamb, rams, hogs, dogs, beans, greens, potatoes, tomatoes, chicken.
So, you know, just to kind of put you in the spirit, that's always, you can never go wrong with that song for Thanksgiving, you know. But you know what I love about it is that it's funny. You know, it's kind of the old and the new coming together, because everybody is remixing this song either on TikTok. They're doing the dances to it. They're doing all kinds of things to it. You know, Thanksgiving is changing. So let's start with you, Wuhan. How has Thanksgiving changed for you in the digital age? Are you doing things differently now? Is it better? Is it worse? What are your thoughts?
I think, you know, the most stressful part of Thanksgiving is obviously traveling, but setting that aside, planning. When you frame it in the digital age, it's so much easier to plan Thanksgiving. For instance, my sister-in-law and her husband and her daughter and their granddaughter are coming to visit with us this next week. And you know, easily, you know, we had to get them, because we live here in the city, get them parking passes. I did that in a snap, which is a pain,
right,
because usually one per household, right? And somebody has to fight over it. And then so also planning what was going to be on the menu. Boom, you get on a quick, you know, Zoom or a quick FaceTime. It's fun. You're not, you know, playing telephone. Well, you know, somebody wants this and somebody wants that. And then you forget to write it down. And then there's no mac and cheese. And then it's a catastrophe. So I think the planning of Thanksgiving, the meal, because as you said, it's all about the meal. I think it's made it more fun, you know, and you can start to socialize and get the mood a little bit better, and set expectations a little bit better, you know, who's sleeping where, and, you know, that kind of thing. So when you have a house full, those little logistics make a big difference.
But beyond that, beyond, you know, those logistical issues, you know, Thanksgiving has changed. You know, as far as, you know, people aren't going as much to watch the Macy's Day Parade or watching it at home. But one of the big ticket items was Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving, you know, or, you know, of course, football games and whatnot. But there's a petition now to bring Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving back, because Charlie Brown is gone. Let me read this to you. So a 25-minute special, which is the Charlie Brown Show, was first released in 1973, originally airing on CBS. though it later aired on other networks. But a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving and other Peanuts holiday specials were moved to Apple TV Plus in 2020 as part of a corporate deal. And so basically watching a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving on public channels is not going to happen this year. And so a lot of folks are crying foul, not just turkey. They're crying foul because, they're saying, wait a second, this is corporate greed. Why is Apple TV taking away our Charlie Brown? And so there is a change.org petition underway. They actually have almost 300,000 signatures already. They need about 300,000 to move up. So Maya, what are your thoughts on Charlie Brown leaving our airwaves and moving to Apple TV Plus?
I did not know that was happening. I didn't know that was a thing. So I am a little bit disappointed by that. I grew up watching Charlie Brown on Thanksgiving, and but I also think that like this is the future. Like this streaming services are taking over. I mean, no one watches cable anymore. And I mean, that's just like what it is. Things change, and this is a part of that sort of modern Thanksgiving or modern holiday season. The consequence. And I think like 10 years from now, we're gonna be saying, oh, I remember when we had cable and we turned on the Charlie Brown Christmas special. So I think it's just we happen to be living in a moment where like we're seeing in real time how things are changing into a different moment. But this was the first time I heard of it. So I'm kind of like, wow.
Yeah. And so, even though families, Wuhan, you mentioned the traveling, but folks almost don't have to travel anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have all these streaming services. As a matter of fact, people don't even have to bust out the knife to cut the turkey. We have electrical knives now to cut the turkey. Does that make you feel, a sense of nostalgia for the past? Or are you like, yes, bust out that electric knife. Let's get this going and bring out the laptops, and it's kind of sure we don't have, Uncle Ronnie here disturbing our peace and drinking all our wine.
Well, you know what? As a kid, I'm sure we all can relate. Like it was exciting to like smell the food in the air and to wait for it to come out and to wait for the table to be set and like then to enjoy the feast together. And now, like, I throw my sweet potatoes in an air fryer and I like,
air fryer.
But I do think there's a lot of nostalgia there because it's just part of like, your family's tradition, how they do Thanksgiving. And I think something I've learned in the pandemic and not always being able to see my family is how you sort of make family outside of your own. I know that I obviously did Thanksgiving virtually a couple times, but I also was blessed enough to like go over to a friend's house and like their mom took me in and like we had Thanksgiving there and it felt really special. But just in the vein of, Thanksgiving being more modern, you kind of like turn on the Zoom, you talk a little bit, you eat your sweet potatoes that were just in the air fryer, and then you sort of call it a day.
Wuhan?
I agree with that. I mean, I have my adoption of technology has accelerated over the years, and I think there's always been new technology. I mean, starting with the wheel, that was technology, and I'm sure that helped somebody at whatever feast that they had back in earliest time. So I used to have an electric knife. It broke, but they work. They're actually quite. I have an air fryer too. I don't know if I'll be using it for Thanksgiving, but I do utilize it. I think we should embrace technology and make it work for us. I mean, that's why I mentioned the stories about the planning. I mean, planning for Thanksgiving is stressful, and and if you can shave off a few minutes preparing your sweet potatoes with an air fryer, that's more time to drink, so, and you don't have to worry about them, overcooking because you got the timer on there. You gotta embrace it.
You can still mess up with the air fryer if you overdo it. You can put it for too long or too high. You can still mess up. I can attest to that.
You're confessing, okay?
Yeah, you're confessing here.
I'm sorry, but I'm relatively new to the air frying game, so I'm still learning my way around this air fryer. But I do love it. I think it's incredible. So, but speaking of old versus new, I want to talk a little bit about my guests for next week, and then we'll be at the end of our broadcast. So next week, I'm so excited that my guest will be Brother Omowale Africa. And speaking of old versus new, what he is doing, he's ventured on this mission to uncover and bring back the history of a late brother. What's his name? Baba Hannibal Tyrus Afrique. He was a Black leader. And so let me just read this to you real quick, just so folks can have an idea of what's coming next week, because I'm very excited about this. I met Brother Omowale Africa during Dr. Tony Browder's Wisdom Wednesday program, and that was titled Hannibal Tyrus Afrique, Restoring the Works of an African Giant. And earlier this year, filmmakers Omowale Africa, my guest next week, and Frank Edwards, they traveled to Mississippi in search of information about Baba Hannibal Tyrus Afrique, a profound Black educational activist, to reintroduce his mission and vision to this generation. And so in June, on what would have been Baba Hannibal's 88th birthday, they released their findings in an article titled Reparations, Food Sovereignty, and Starvation in America. And what Mr. Africa was talking about was so profound, and he really enlightened me about the food deserts, food sovereignty, that whole mission, and how it impacts disadvantaged people, poor people, Black, Indigenous people, the folks who have been historically left behind, disadvantaged. So he has this mission to bring about this knowledge and information. So next week we'll be hearing about that. So I'm very excited. Hopefully you guys will tune in. So anyways, but thank you all so much. I do have one last question before we end. This is the question before we end. We'll start with you, Mana. Do you think that there should be a statue of, should there be a statue erected of Leader Nancy Pelosi in Little Italy in Baltimore, her hometown where she was born? What are your thoughts on that? There's been some conversations about that, so what do you think? Should there be a statue erected of Leader Pelosi in Little Italy, Baltimore?
I think so. I mean, I am pro statue Pelosi just about anywhere. I think that would be nice. It'd be nice to honor her in her home city. And I know Baltimore has a strong claim on Pelosi, so I'm sure it'll make a lot of Baltimoreans very happy. But I mean, I think that it would just be a special way to honor her and her legacy. And she talks about being from Baltimore, being the daughter of Baltimore a lot. So,
right. Wuhan, what do you think? Do you think Pelosi deserves a statue in Baltimore, or do you think it's too much glorifying of our politicians and not a healthy way to go?
No, I think she is a woman of many firsts. And I think that should be a criteria for that. I mean, she's a daughter of the city. And I mean, there's a picture of Rocky, or a statue of Rocky. He's not even a real person in Philadelphia. So, I mean, that's a no-brainer to me. I mean, if you can have a fictional character with a 3 times lifetime statue, she's a lock. Lead pipe lock for a statue.
Yeah, Rocky is very real to many people. Be very careful.
Unfortunately.
Well, thank you all so very much. This was such a wonderful conversation. Let's see, somebody left. Let's see if we have a question. Why shouldn't there? Oh, well, Rick Short said, "Why shouldn't there be?"
Right.
You know, I think you're in agreement here, Rick. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank you both, Wuhan. Thank you so much. For joining us. Can you tell folks how they can find you on Instagram or Twitter? What's your handle?
Oh gosh, I'm not really doing Twitter anymore.
Okay.
I got the car, so I really have to let Twitter go. So
okay.
I'm thinking about selling the car, so I might have to demusk. But and I love my car too. But I really don't do that much I'm on Facebook, you know, but I usually use that. I don't use that medium to communicate that much. I am on LinkedIn. You can find me, you know, Wuhan Dansby on LinkedIn. I use it, you know, for business primarily, but I don't really promote a social media presence that way, other than LinkedIn.
All right, sounds good. And I think it's great folks can reach out to you. You are the principal of DRE Partners, DRE Partners, and you offer a range of consulting services, including providing expert advice. And with this new Congress coming in, hopefully some folks will be reaching out to you to help get them all together. So, you know, hopefully I'll leave a link to your information in this broadcast. But Maya, how can folks reach out to you?
So I am mostly on Instagram. So my handle is Literary Theories. One day I will change it to something a little bit more identifiable, but that is how people can reach out to me. I'm also on LinkedIn, but I prefer Instagram.
Instagram. Well, you are an influencer. Maya is an influencer on Instagram. She has Instagram
micro.
You know. So, anyways, this was such a great dialogue, great conversation. I really appreciate you both for your input, your insight, your expertise. Is what makes this event possible and fun. So, thank you so much again, and I want to thank everyone who joined me, especially Rick Scott. Thank you for always supporting me, Rick. You know, no matter where you are, I just really appreciate you so very much. Thank everyone else who has joined in. I'll be back here next week. Have a wonderful and safe Thanksgiving. And I'm Jeanette Lenoir, and this is Our American Culture.